Welcome to Copentel, a podcast about Copenhagen and Denmark's history. Written and produced by Danish historian and tour guide Rune Edberg. This podcast features excerpts from Rune Edberg's book Know Your Dane, Unlocking the Secrets to the Danish Mentality, as well as stories from his 2 walking tours, World War II and Copenhagen, and Copenhagen's Dark History Walk. It is possible to book a spot on these tours on the website copentel.com. On this episode,
(1600 to 1848) action, drama, and tragedy. War with Sweden. After Christian IV's reign, a new, bloody war with Sweden commenced, the so-called Carl Gustav War. From 1657 to 1660. During this war, Denmark, Poland, and Russia tried to strangle Sweden. During this time, Denmark lost a lot of land to Sweden, especially the richest regions in the east, together with a big part of Norway. During this period, there was a key break with the historical world order. A burgeoning attempt to construct a Danish identity and mentality happened throughout Saxo, where the subsequent kings sought to further this. Even though the empire had a complex population of Danes, Norwegians, German speakers, and the northern peoples of Iceland and the Faroe Islands. From 1660 to 1848, Denmark became a regular monarchist dictatorship. It also meant a breach of cooperation between the Danish nobility and the king, who, in the wake of the catastrophic loss to Sweden, accused the nobility of having failed their country. Instead, the king allied himself with a new group, the citizens. They did not necessarily have the same privileged background as the nobility, but the king decided that the most skilled people could rise within the union, despite their backgrounds. War with Sweden, again. From 1675 to 1679, Denmark and Sweden were again at war in the so-called Scandinavian War. After that, a relatively long period of peace followed, until 1709, when Denmark was once again involved in war operations with Sweden for the following decade. Danish imperialism. This period also saw an expansion of the Danish colonies as the country acquired St. John in the Caribbean in 1718. And, a few years later, Greenland was incorporated into the kingdom in 1721. The Danish capital, Copenhagen, burned in 1728, with a catastrophic loss of human life and priceless cultural treasures, such as books. In 1733, Denmark purchased the island of St. Croix from France. Also, in 1733, the lords gained even more control by introducing stamsbandet, which limited living conditions of serfs. After many years spent in poverty, there was a boom in the Danish economy due in part to the large Danish merchant navy and the exploitation of slaves in the Danish colonies. After 55 years, the stamsbandet was finally abolished in 1788. Denmark's war fleet grew exponentially in the following years, becoming one of Europe's largest, although Denmark was good at keeping a neutral foreign policy. However, it all went wrong in 1801, when the English reached Copenhagen with Lord Nelson and attacked the Danish Navy. The Royal Danish Navy in Norway is lost. Denmark remained neutral during most of the Napoleonic Wars, but when the British returned in 1807 to steal the Danish Navy and its more than 200 ships, Denmark-Norway was forced to choose sides in favor of France, while Copenhagen was bombarded. In 1813, Norway fell to Sweden. However, there were also positive outcomes amid all the misery. During these years, there was a renaissance in Danish art, thanks to the so-called Golden Age painters. In 1814, the Danish Jews were given the same rights as the rest of the population, and in the same year, primary schools were established to ensure all children received 7 years of schooling. In the wake of these historic moments, the Danish mentality began to flourish. The gates to the dark history of Copenhagen are open once again. On this walking tour, we will take a journey back in time to some of the most dramatic, tragic, and dark events in the Danish capital's history. In the company of our historian Rune Edberg, we will visit the central locations in the old medieval part of the city centre. From Swedish besieges and British bombardments, to witch burnings and executions, Copenhagen was a much smaller city than today, enclosed and claustrophobic behind high city walls,
and with sparse and primitive sanitary conditions, which became a threat to its inhabitants. When the plague epidemic hit in 1711, killing 1/3 of Copenhagen's inhabitants. The dark part of Copenhagen's history includes poverty and poor housing, which played its part in the bad living conditions of the majority of the population. Other dramatic stories and events told on this tour include the cholera epidemic of 1853 and the city fires of 1728 and 1795, which have played a central part in shaping the current look and architecture of Copenhagen's city centre. We will also pass some of the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard's old addresses, and the place where the world-famous Danish brewery, Carlsberg, was founded. So, book your spot on the tour now on copentel.com.
Danish humor. He who does not understand a joke, does not understand Danish. Quote. George Brandes. Just as the overall Danish mentality can be interpreted as being a competition between the Danish concepts of the law of Janty and Hygge, Danish humor is also a unique combination of irony and sarcasm. A minority complex paired with the country's historic disasters on the battlefield, as well as its economic downturns, have helped shape the Danish humor, which may seem extremely rough and insensitive to outsiders. The use of the Danish anti-authoritarian and direct humor can, in certain cases, cause a significant backlash abroad, as seen in connection with the Danish director Lars von Trier's comments at the Cannes Film Festival, when he jokingly claimed to have sympathy for Adolf Hitler. Here are some classic examples of Danish jokes. A beggar went up to a well-dressed lady in the department store and said, "I have not eaten anything for 4 days." She looked at him and replied, "If only I had your willpower." What a tourist says to a taxi driver. "This is the first time I'm in Copenhagen. Show me the Little Mermaid." What the taxi driver hears. "Take me to Langelini via Herlev, Albertslund and Ishøj. All suburbs outside of Copenhagen." Top executives play golf. Intermediaries play tennis. Workers go bowling. What does it show? The bigger the position, the smaller the balls. This limitlessness in Danish humor is a staple of the Danish mentality in terms of power and authority. On the other hand, Danes are also afraid of conflict and tend to keep their opinions to themselves when strangers are around. Book a spot on Copentel's World War II walking tour in Copenhagen. Take a journey back to the 1940s, when the Nazi German forces had occupied the Danish capital. On this guided walking tour we will visit the city district of Vesterbro and the city center of Copenhagen. In the company of our historian Rune Edberg, who is specialized in the Second World War and the German occupation of Denmark 1940 to 1945, you will have the unique opportunity to visit some of the central places of the Danish freedom struggle during the Second World War. You'll become acquainted with the central themes and paradoxes of the period. Danes in the resistance movement and Danes in German service, which came to violent expression through assassinations and bomb attacks that divided the Danish population during the 5 long years from 1940 to 1945. We will stop outside at some of Copenhagen's most central locations and sites from the Second World War. This includes the former Gestapo headquarters at Shellhuset, where we will hear the story of the British bombing of the building on the 21st of March 1945 and its consequences. We will also visit the place where the resistance group Holger Dansk was founded and come past the dreaded addresses from which Hitler's henchmen ruled Denmark with an iron hand. You can book your spot on copentel.com.
You have been listening to Copentel, a podcast about Copenhagen and Denmark's history. Written and produced by Danish historian and tour guide Rune Edberg. This podcast features excerpts from Rune Edberg's book Know Your Dane, Unlocking the Secrets to the Danish Mentality, as well as stories from his 2 walking tours, World War II and Copenhagen, and Copenhagen's Dark History Walk. It is possible to book a spot on these tours on the website copentel.com.